Hi, it's Dwyer. It's September 25th, 2025. GamblersAdvisory.com, a free site. BettingAngle.us, a free site. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, folks, one of the shocking things, and it's shocking to me, about getting older is that people forget the past, right? You know, you talk to people. I was once in a bar. In fact, I'll tell a story. I was once in a bar. I was just the old guy off at the corner having a drink. And suddenly, some young guys, I didn't even know all of them, some young guys came to me and wanted to debate. They were having an argument among themselves. They came to me and wanted to debate who was better, Michael Jordan or LeBron James, right? So I was having a conversation with them. And, you know, if you're from my era, it's not close. It's preposterous that the question's even being asked. You know who the best was. It's not even a debate. Jordan's the better scorer. Jordan is the better defender. Jordan is the better leader. No knock on LeBron, right? But Jordan's the better leader. Understand, Jordan, more rings in fewer games, right? More MVPs in fewer games. It's not close, So, to make a long story short, after we had this argument, the guys admitted to me, and these were younger guys. I must have had OG on my forehead, or old sports fan someplace. The guys admitted to me that they had never seen Jordan play. That's how ridiculous the conversation was, right? I'm sure there's another group out there who, when they hear that Tom Brady is the best ever at quarterback, they think to themselves, 4 Super Bowls, no picks. How could anybody be better than Joe Montana, right? Well, let's talk about boxing. In the United Kingdom, and that's a curious country. Let me just give an American perspective, right? I hear some views from the United Kingdom, and I'm baffled, right? I don't understand, and I'm serious when I say this. I don't understand how the country could be so hard on people like Tyson Fury. You have one of the greats, and that country just goes overboard in ripping apart, its talent, right? Understand, too, only the United Kingdom could you have a group like the Rolling Stones that actually lead the country, right? At one point, they had to leave the country because the UK set it up where, they would have had a hard time surviving given the tax rates. Well, you have an outfit there, the Hall and Ringside Charitable Trust, and they just had a poll, right? Always be leery of polls. You're a boxing fan. There's the political truth, and then there's the real truth. They had a poll, and they named Joe Calzaghe the best fighter in British history. Right now, understand, I've lived through the entire Joe Calzaghe era, right? I've seen Joe Calzaghe. I remember when Joe Calzaghe was an unknown. Joe Calzaghe is certainly a Hall of Famer. He's certainly a great fighter, right? But let's make 2 points here, right? The first is that everyone worshiping this unbeaten status that any fighter has, whether it's Joe Calzaghe, whether it's others, right? Rocky Marciano, Floyd Right? Just understand, Ray Leonard was not unbeaten. And the reason why is simple. Besides the fact that he fought too long, in his prime, he was fighting guys like Roberto Duran, Thomas the Hitman Hearns, Wilfredo Benitez. These are all spectacular fighters, folks. Spectacular fighters. When he was a little older, Marvelous Marvin Hagler. Right now, folks, I would argue that had Floyd Mayweather come up in the 1980s, I don't think he beats Thomas Hearns. I'm just being 100 here. I don't think he beats Thomas Hearns. Right? I question openly whether he beats Ray Leonard. Right? So to me, you show me a guy, he's unbeaten, I'll say, hey, good for him and stuff like that. That doesn't end the conversation. Right? Unbeaten just means the guy didn't fight, didn't have the ability to fight, perhaps avoided certain fighters when both were in their prime. So Joe Calzaghe, who I love, right? Hand speed. Let's talk styles. The second point is that styles matter. Let's talk styles. Right? Joe Calzaghe, very fast-handed. Very fast-handed. He's that rare, fast-handed fighter who could be on his front foot. That Peter Manfredo fight, that is a masterpiece. Right? The fast-handed guy who imposes his hand speed on you. Calzaghe wasn't overly back foot. He's not moving away from you and then flashing hand speed. No, this is the guy who could walk into the pocket with a lot of hand speed. But folks, what I want people to do is to consider his big wins. At the time, we thought Jeff Left Hook Lacey was the next big thing in boxing. The reality was that Lacey was unproven at the time. Right? He later gets stopped by Roy Jones. He later gets stopped by Sullivan Barrera. He later gets stopped by Humberto Savine. Mikhail Kessler, let's talk styles. Can we go there? Right? How good was Kessler on his back foot? Right? I would say that the Mikhail Kessler fight is Calzaghe's biggest moment. Right? But I thought Andre Ward decided to get deep in the pocket on Mikhail Kessler. And I thought Kessler didn't know what to do. Right? Just flat out. Kessler could accuse Ward of headbutting. Folks, I didn't think Ward was headbutting. I thought Andre Ward got deep in the pocket, was ready to exchange, and Mikhail Kessler folded. Right? Let me say this too. Kessler also lost to Carl Froch. Understand, Calzaghe doesn't fight Ward or Carl Froch. Let me say this too. Calzaghe does fight some contemporaries. Roy Jones. But Roy is well past his prime at the time of that fight. Bernard Hopkins, I would argue that's an intriguing fight because Hopkins is past his prime. But you notice Hopkins is giving Calzaghe, who himself is past his prime. This is Calzaghe on the way out. Hopkins is giving Calzaghe all he can handle. Right? Hopkins legitimately knocks Calzaghe down. Right? I want people to revisit that fight. I thought Calzaghe eked it out, but the key word here is eked. No one dominated in that fight. That fight's a close fight. Right? Who knows which way a rematch would go? Let's be critical here. Right? Again, this is not a fan club site. Calzaghe fought some guys where I would argue, if you look at the film now, please look at the film, don't go on the narratives, you'll be asking yourself a deeper question. Did Calzaghe beat Robin Reed? Revisit that fight. Now, don't get me wrong. All of these unbeaten guys have that fight where you think, wow, did he really win? Right? Mayweather-Castillo. A fight I've never seen, but it's legendary. Marciano, Roland Lastarza, the first fight. Right? That's a legendary fight. Right? You have a whole group of people out there who say, gee, did he win? Right? Andre Ward, Kovalev, the first fight, folks, on my card, and I love Andre Ward. On my card, I had Kovalev winning that fight. Right? Kovalev gets the knockdown. Ward needs a big comeback to win that fight. I know there are those out there who feel he had the big comeback. As the fight happened, I didn't think so. Right? So my point to you is simply, some of these guys with unbeaten records have those fights where you ask the question, did he really win this fight? Right? The Robin Reed fight that Calzaghe had raises that question for me. Right? Let me also say this too. On YouTube, we have a comment section. If you disagree, right, and I know I'm going to hear from the LeBron crowd on the Jordan comparison, right? There might be some of you who want to talk up Tom Brady, right, regarding Montana, and I'll concede. Brady's best Super Bowl, a Super Bowl against the Eagles, is one he lost, right? Brady's had some great moments that the public doesn't talk about. Also, Brady in Tampa, he's there for 5 minutes. He picks up a ring. Montana only won Super Bowls with the 49ers. Right? Brady has some great things to discuss. Right? I know there's the Joe Calzaghe crowd out there. And he was a great fighter. Right? He was a jazz man. His father, in fact, literally was a jazz man. You look at Calzaghe and you're thinking Charlie Parker, right? This is the guy who comes out and he's going up and down the scales, right? Letting his hands go. Then he would take a step to the side, let his hands go. Fun to watch. But folks, when you see a Tyson Fury go left-handed and do it flawlessly, when you see a Tyson Fury fighting a Kevin Johnson, and then you realize Fury is fighting with his offhand, and you have to look closely to realize it. When you see a Fury move inside because outside is too dangerous. On Deontay Wilder, after Fury's been knocked down twice in their third fight. When you see a Fury put his hands behind his back against a Vladimir Klitschko, aren't you thinking to yourself, this is a bunch of skills that Joe Calzaghe simply doesn't have? Well, let's go further. Right? You have one of the great heavyweight champions. Maybe it's his demeanor. I don't know what's going on. But my vote, you ask me who's the best British fighter in history, I'm going to say Lennox Lewis. Right, folks? Just understand. Lewis, if you look at the resume, and I recognize that he fought Mike Tyson when Mike was past his prime. He fought Evander Holyfield when Holyfield was past his prime. But folks, he fought Razor Ruddock. That's prime against prime. He fought one of history's more undervalued, underrated heavyweights, a guy Foreman didn't want to fight, Tony Tucker. Revisit that fight. Right? Tucker was dangerous. Understand, Hasim Rahman, I'm not saying Rahman's an all-time great, but I want people to revisit Rahman's fight against Corey Sanders, the guy who destroyed Vladimir Klitschko, who Vladimir Klitschko never fought again. Think about that. Right? It's Klitschko's brother, Vitaly Klitschko, who fought Corey Sanders. Revisit Hasim Rahman against Corey Sanders. Right? Rahman was actually an underrated fighter. Right? In the moment, we were wondering, how good is David Tua? Right? Lennox Lewis made it look easy. Lennox Lewis beat Shannon Briggs. Right? Who'd go on to be heavyweight champ. Lennox Lewis beats Tommy Morrison. One of my favorite fights, this was a rough and tumble fight. Could have gone the other way. Lennox Lewis beats Merciless Ray Mercer. Another one of my favorite fights, I believe it's the toughest fight Lennox Lewis ever had. And it's against a heavyweight who's underrated. I think this guy's one of the all-time greats. Vitaly Klitschko. Folks, that's a great fight. Right now, Lewis benefited because he cut Vitaly. But folks, let's just say at the time Lewis was supposed to fight somebody else. Looking back, that's one of the great fights in history. That's one of the most talented heavyweight fights in history. Right? And Vitaly jumps out on Lewis. It's Lewis who makes the comeback in that fight. Let me say, too, we fought Michael Grant. Many people thought Michael Grant was the future of the division. Lewis took that fight. Lewis was dominant in the fight. A little edgy. Ref should have cracked down on Lewis hitting and holding. But understand, Lewis doesn't try to hide in that fight. Lewis comes out, and Lewis is there for a shootout. Right? He also fought Andrew Galata. Right, folks? Revisit that fight. Lewis comes out, checks out Galata, then Lewis decides to make it a shootout. I don't believe Galata survives the first round of that fight. So, folks, I have no idea what's happening with the Hall and Ringside Charitable Trust. But how could a country have Lennox Lewis in the building and believe that a guy who beat these guys, Tony Tucker and Mike Tyson and Vitaly Klitschko and Ray Mercer, right? How could the country believe that there is a better fighter than Lennox Lewis? Lewis, by the way, avenged all of his losses. Right? Oliver McCall is a bit of an urban legend. He's supposed to have had some legendary sparring sessions with Iron Mike Tyson when Iron Mike Tyson was the king of the world. Right? The urban legend is that the guy who pushed Tyson the most was Tyson's sparring partner. Now, okay, sure, critics of Lewis could say that in the rematch, Oliver McCall has a nervous breakdown. But the bottom line is, Lewis shows up for the rematch. Lewis is throwing his jab. Great jab, by the way. Great jab. Lewis is there ready for a tumble. Right? Ready for a rumble. right? And McCall couldn't respond. So to me, I think overrated is the undefeated status that fighters have, right? I celebrate unbeaten guys, right? I'll say, hey, this guy, I celebrate David Benavidez today, right? I celebrate Terrence Crawford. But folks need to understand, you have some greats. I'll name two. Marvin Hagler shows up in Philly, ends up with some losses, right? Carlos Monzon, starts the sport, didn't quite know the sport, has some losses. Folks, those are two of the most ferocious fighters I know of. Right? My favorite fighter in history, Jack Johnson, had some losses early. Openly asked guys who beat him, hey, what was I doing wrong? Learned the sport. Became a terror. Right? Jack Dempsey. I mean, in the old days, they threw young guys to the wolves. One of the stories with Lester Martinez, who's a ringer. This is the guy who just got the draw with Christian and Billy, who happens to be the top-rated mandatory contender. Right? Just understand, for his first fight, Lester Martinez was thrown in the ring with Ricardo Mayorga. Martinez won the fight. Right? So, hey, Joe Calzaghe, unbeaten. Right? I clap. He beat Chris Eubank. Interesting fight. Right? Drops Eubank. Calzaghe, one of my favorite fighters, did a lot of great things. Right? I'm sorry. I would take Lennox Lewis over him. UK better wake up. I would also take, because skills matter, because only one guy has beaten this man, I would also take Tyson Fury over him. Right, folks? If you're watching a fight and, some guy changes stance, and then you realize, wow, I've just been watching Tyson Fury for the last minute fighting lefty and didn't know it. Right? When you see a guy who can be back foot, then he can be front foot, then he can be in the pocket. Folks, all of that should matter more than unbeaten records. Right? Let me say too, if you're really going to go down the road where you look at a guy's skill and you're rating him against others, right? Understand, some of the guys with the shortest reigns are among the best in boxing. Right? People don't realize that Floyd Patterson was the guy on his front foot the first fight against Sonny Liston. Right? Liston was a guy who, if a Floyd Patterson, if a Cleveland Williams tried to bum rush him, Liston could actually take a step back, stay in the pocket, and box the man. Oh, and Liston, of course, hit harder than most. Right? And, of course, in terms of great jabs, Liston had a spectacular jab. He just happened to lose, in my opinion, to one of the few guys in history who could beat him, Muhammad Ali. Right? So, I don't even go by length of reign when I'm looking at champs. Right? Look at how the guy is in the ring, what he's doing. Look at the level of opposition. Right? Think about how preposterous the Roberto Duran story is. Talking about Duran as one of the four kings overlooks the fact that he's one of the greats at lightweight. That's before he comes up to welterweight to fight people like Ray Leonard. Understand, too, there's some Duran fights we don't even talk about. Thomas the Hitman Hearns beats Pimpino Cuevas to become the welterweight champion. Right? Well, no one talks about how Roberto Duran fights Pimpino Cuevas. And it's one of Duran's dominant performances. He methodically outboxes Pimpino Cuevas. Right? Then of course realize that when Duran fights Marvin Hagler, and he goes 15 rounds with Marvin Hagler, that's not even at welterweight. That's a lightweight fighting at middleweight against a dominant champion. And Duran's not knocked out. He goes 15 rounds. So you look at the Duran resume, folks, there are a bunch of guys he fought who you think, wow, this is a top-notch guy. I don't even hold the fact that Thomas the Hitman Hearns destroys Duran. That's a fight you need to know. Right? The point is, Duran's in the ring with Thomas the Hitman Hearns. Now, if you fight the opponents Duran fought, along the way, you're going to get some losses. Right? That's the bottom line. Right? Along the way, you're going to get some losses. Right? Duran, by the way, great fight. He fights around Barkley. And Duran, the same guy who comes inside on Ray Leonard the first fight and snuffs Ray out, is outside against Iran Barkley. Right? The bottom line is Duran's not a fool. Right? He knows Barkley, was tough inside. Right? Barkley beat Hearns twice. Right? He's outside on Iran Barkley and outboxes him in New York City. Folks, those are the things to consider when you're thinking about great fights. Not just the fact that the guy was unbeaten and beat some names in their prime. Mikhail Kessler, big fight. Jeff Lefkowitz, right? Not quite on par with Ray Leonard, right? And as for Ray, all I can say is you're talking about a guy who was out of the ring for years, plural, with an eye problem, right? But yet he comes back, and it's when he comes back as part of that second wave that he fights the light heavyweight champion, Donnie Lalonde. And how does that fight end? And granted, it's at a catch weight, but how does that fight end? It ends with the smaller Ray Leonard getting the stoppage. And then you look at Ray's resume closely and you realize Ray Leonard against heavy competition, right? Heavy competition, including Mayweather's father, Floyd Sr., ends his career with a better than 60% KO ratio. Right, so folks in the UK, wake up. Joe Calzaghe's a great fighter. You have other guys, Lennox Lewis, who's still announcing fights. Right, Lewis, who's in the building at these big events. And possibly current fighters. We'll see if Tyson Fury returns to the ring, who to me belong in the conversation with Joe Calzaghe. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.